I'm here with Ben Sand, one of my best buddies. Just two bald white guys hanging out on a Thursday afternoon here at the Contingent's office. If y'all don't know what the Contingent does, basically they've transformed foster care system across Oregon and 3 other states around recruiting healthy foster families. And then Ben and I and Sue Embry co-founded The Script, which is leadership pathways for underrepresented professionals here in Portland. Cool. So we met at a coffee 12 years ago in Old Town. Gosh, they're no longer there, but it was, right by my office. And you described, the nonprofit at the time was called Portland Leadership Foundation. Right. And I was super enthralled with this notion that you kind of educated me on of like Portland having a soul. So like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So when we started what's now the Contingent, which was Portland Leadership Foundation, it was through this idea that the city of Portland is a unique place that has its own, what I'll use the word is charism, its own grace, its own way about it, and that it's different than any other city. And that our conviction was that Portland as a city in its uniqueness needs to be served in a way that is tailored, and that there's no like template on how to engage the city. But when you look at Portland's private sector and Portland's social sector and Portland's public sector, there are so many things about it that make it unique, and that the only way out of Portland's kind of, if you will, situation is to love it. And so we originally started with like, what is it? Portland's not a battleground, it's a playground. And it's unique as a city. And what are all the things that we love about it? And some of those things are very obvious, whether that's the food culture or how close it is to the outdoors, or, all of the kind of amazing things about the city. But there also was this thing of like, what are some of its challenges? And the only way out of those challenges is to love it, to nurture it, to care for the soul of the city. So anyway, our early conversations were like, if Portland had a soul, like what about its flourishing, but also what are the elements of it that need tendering? Yeah. And we're still working on that. We don't use that language, but I think it's an interesting idea when you look at the city that we love.
Yeah. No, I love that. And then we were hanging out a couple weekends ago at Cannon Beach, and I didn't retain the name of the author and all that that you're gonna tell me about, but like we're in a storm. We're kind of we've been in the eye of the storm and we're coming up out of it, but we're still in a storm here in Portland. And what are kind of 2 or 3 of the elements of the storm, and then what can we all do about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as everybody knows, Portland, for those of us that have been here, I've been here 23 years. The Portland today, the experience of living in Portland today is very different than it was 23 years ago. And there are some storms that we've experienced. And it's interesting. I mean, our organization, the Contingent, got heavily involved in emergency response during COVID. And, obviously, like, there's so many stories about what people experienced about Portland during COVID, but some of what those experiences that we've had from the COVID period on, even till today, are not necessarily something that we should have been surprised by. I think there's actually deep change that's taking place across the West. And there's a book that has really informed that. And one of the reasons why we changed our name and we have invested organizationally the way that we have is actually because of this book. The book's called The Storm Before the Calm. And it's written by a futurist, a guy by the name of George Friedman. And this book was published prior to the COVID period. But in this book, he predicts that American society is going to go through a total disruption. And our board met for a 3-day retreat and looked at this book and asked ourselves the question, if Friedman is right, like, how do we respond organizationally? And that was, something that we really examined. And Friedman basically says that the American democracy is going to go through a disruption of its institutional cycle. So institutions that were once solid, stalwart, trusted, are going to begin to break down. The technocrats that have been running institutions are going to see an unraveling. And I think in many ways we have experienced that.
It's like completely on point
Yeah,
to where we are right now.
Exactly. So that was his first point. The second point was that the socioeconomic cycle that we had previously been in prior to the 2020s decade, that socioeconomic cycle is going to collapse, that there's going to be massive disruption, and he predicts, although this is maybe bad news, he predicts that there will be a recession late in this decade. And so in light of that, how do we think about our city's economy and the state's economy? And I think we're obviously seeing a socioeconomic disruption as well. And then the third premise was that there's going to be a technological revolution, and that technological revolution is going to displace how society functions. Again, this is prior ChatGPT.
This
prior
is really
AI.
depressing.
I
Like,
know.
You're a wild optimist. I'm a wild optimist.
I know.
Like, come on, help me out here.
Well, my point is, though, when we read this book in early 2020, prior to COVID-19 totally shaking everything up, and we made this big bet as an organization, like, we need to become a data and technology driven organization. We need to be prepared to respond if these things happen. And anyway, here's the good news. The good news is that he says, hey, there is going to be a storm, but after that, there will be a resetting, and there will be a deep calm, and America is going to be fine, and Portland's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Thank God. Yeah. But that we need to recognize that these deep cycles are coming. And I think we're squarely in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And so now we have an opportunity to ask ourselves, how do we respond?
Yeah. Okay, last part before we finish up here is this notion, again, that you've introduced to me, and I think a lot of my peers really agree with this, is that the most radical thing that we can do is to take the practical middle path, the third way.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me that that's radical. But like, what do you mean by that in the context of Portland?
Yeah. So when we made this decision as an organization to shift our focus and to expand nationally and to become a data and technology organization and to anticipate some of the disruptions that I previously mentioned, we also have been implementing an organizational philosophy that we call the third way. And what that means you got to remember, we work in Oregon, Arkansas, Tennessee. I spent a lot of time in the South. Mm-hmm. So what we needed to do was figure out an organizational philosophy on how to think about doing community work. And the premise of the third way is that it's anytime you're being tempted to fall into this is left or right or red or blue, or this idea is true, it's a black and white truth, the solution or the answer usually hovers in this creative third space. And the goal is to acknowledge that people's political perspectives or people's perception of what truth is valid, but that leaders need to occupy a third space, and that's what's going to get us out of the storm, is a commitment to what I would call the radical middle. And anyway, we've been pursuing that, and we've been able to occupy that space. But I think that there's a lot of leaders in Portland right now that are also trying to occupy that space. I mean, when I met you, you were like a flaming liberal. I don't know what you are now.
I am a Democrat that is trying really hard to come to the center, and I feel like I'm making some strides here.
Yes,
but yeah.
I'm a Democrat too. Yeah. I guess my point is, it's how we occupy our political identity, our identity as a Portlander, and how we do that is going to be equally as important as what we do, and now is a time for us to occupy, I think, this third way in a more creative way. And like I said, I think there's just so many examples of people doing that.
Yeah. So let's talk about, like, last thing. all of this is like great heady stuff, but I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
What Portlanders who are seeing this video, what can they do? There's volunteerism, there's there's a bunch of things that they can do. Like what kind of advice? 2 or 3 things.
Yeah.
You do?
My argument would be that the most prophetic thing that Portlanders can do is, when faced with a difficult situation, go back to this irreducible prime of what makes us great, which is the way that we do neighborhood, the way that we love our neighbors, and the way we can best take action is to figure out what are the things that are breaking my heart in my neighborhood, what's the most proximate thing, and stay engaged in the battle of ideas, stay engaged in building the democracy at the global level, but also to take action. And there are so many ways. Certainly, if you want to get involved in the child welfare system in Oregon, we have like 50 ways you can get involved through our initiative, Every Child Oregon. Just Google that. And we can get you directly connected to serving kids and families. But there's what you're doing with We All Have a Name. There's all kinds of organizations that you can volunteer with, all kinds of causes to get involved with. But it's being able to occupy both the hyper proximate with also the big idea. Can I tell one story?
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the persons that I think is doing this so well in Portland right now is our police chief, Bob Day. Bob's a friend of mine. He's a friend of yours. I was so struck a couple weeks ago by a press conference, and you should Google this if you haven't seen it yet. But there was a shooting. Federal agents shot 2 people in East County, and there was, and this was right on the heels of some of the violence in Minneapolis. And there was this question of like, what are we going to do about this? What's going on? And there was some suspicion that some of these folks may have been connected to a gang out of Venezuela. And there was one press conference with Bob Day and all of the elected officials, and that was right, saying like, let's let cooler heads prevail. And then the next day they found out that yes, indeed, these 2 victims of this shooting were actually connected to this gang. And again, if you haven't seen it, you need to Google it. Bob Day shows up the next day by himself at this press conference, and he begins to weep. It's gonna make me cry. And he's crying. This police chief, this job that is supposed to be occupying like strength, as like the metaphor, he showed a kind of strength that I think was so beautiful. And he was wanting in this press conference to communicate that he has such deep love for the Latinx community in Portland, because he's proximate to the people who are experiencing what it must feel like to be constantly afraid. He loves them, he knows them, but he also needed to deliver that yes, indeed, these people were connected to a violent gang. And so he's crying in this press conference because he's trying to communicate 2 things at the same time. That I love my neighbors who are experiencing a life that is riddled and must be riddled by daily fear. And also I need to communicate clearly that this was maybe a situation that escalated because there was a real threat. And the third way was in the tears. It was in the empathy. And, I know it's kind of a meta idea, but it is a personal example of how you as a leader can have your big idea, have your vocational conviction, but also maybe the question is, how's that grounded in proximity and empathy? And when empathy meets responsibility is where I think Portland is its best.
I think we're gonna do a mic drop on that and just leave everybody to go and Google that and show up in a way that is both vulnerable and empathetic, as well as accountable in Portland.
Yeah.
We'll be better.
Yeah.
All right, cheers.
Thanks, everybody.